They said I was replaceable at 22. At 27, I had built something irreplaceable. Picture this. It's a Thursday afternoon. I'm sitting in a rooftop restaurant in downtown Nashville, the kind of place where the glasses are too thin and the menu has no prices. And I'm about to close a deal worth more than my entire salary for the year they fired me. My phone is buzzing on the table. I already know who it is before I flip it over. It's Marcus. Marcus, who sat across from me in a conference room 5 years ago and told me, with a straight face, like he was reading from a script, that I was an adequate worker, but ultimately replaceable, that I lacked the vision the company needed moving forward, that my position was being eliminated. And then he slid a manila envelope across the table. 2 weeks severance, a typed letter, a handshake that felt like a verdict. I was 22 years old. I didn't cry in that room. I saved that for the parking garage. 7 floors down, alone with the hum of fluorescent lights. I sat in my car and let everything collapse. But here's what I need you to understand. That moment, that parking garage, that manila envelope, Marcus and his flat corporate voice, none of it broke me. And it didn't make me bitter. What it made me was focused. In the 5 years that followed, I did not scream. I did not fight back. I did not post anything online. I did not make a single phone call asking for explanations or apologies. I just became someone they never expected. And on that Thursday afternoon in Nashville, when I flipped my phone over and saw Marcus's name, he wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling because his company needed my services, my firm, my team, my expertise. I let it go to voicemail. Not out of spite, out of something so much better than spite, out of indifference. This is my story. And if you've ever been told you weren't enough, not smart enough, not driven enough, not the right person for the room, I made this video for you. Because what I learned in those 5 years changed everything. Not just my career, my identity, my sense of what I was actually worth. Stay with me. This one's going to take a while, and it's worth every minute. Intro and branding, 2 to 3 minutes. This story isn't about revenge. Revenge is small. Revenge is loud. Revenge requires you to keep your eyes on someone else's life when you should be building your own. This story is about becoming. Becoming someone so absorbed in their own growth, so genuinely invested in their own transformation, that by the time the people who doubted you finally look up, you're already somewhere they can't reach. If that sounds like something you need to hear right now, welcome. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications, because this channel exists for one reason: to document what happens when ordinary people decide, quietly and without announcement, to stop playing small. I post every week, real stories, real transformation. No shortcuts, no hype, just the long game. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Act 1, the lowest point, 3 to 15 minutes. I want to tell you who I was before all of this, not the edited version, not the version I packaged nicely for a bio or a LinkedIn summary, the real version. I grew up in Clarksville, Tennessee, middle-class family, just barely. My dad worked inventory at a distribution center. My mom was a school aide. We weren't poor, but money was always the thing that hovered at the edge of every conversation, a low, constant frequency you learned to hear even when nobody was talking about it. I was the kid who was good at everything, but great at nothing. You know that kid? Maybe you were that kid. B+ student, decent at sports, funny enough that people liked me, but never so exceptional that anyone pulled me aside and said, you have something special. What I had was a desperate, almost embarrassing hunger to prove something. I just didn't know what or to who. I studied business at a state school, graduated with a 3.4 GPA and approximately 0 real skills that translated to the actual working world. But I had hustle, I had a willingness to say yes to everything, and I had this naive belief, this almost sweet, almost embarrassing belief that if I worked hard and stayed loyal, the system would reward me. I got a job at a mid-sized marketing and consulting firm, a real job with a real salary, $38,000 a year, and I was so proud of it I almost couldn't breathe. The firm was run by a man named Gerald, who wore quarter-zip sweaters and said things like, "The tide raises all boats" in meetings. Marcus was a senior account manager, probably 35 at the time, the kind of guy who had the confidence of someone who'd never truly failed at anything, or maybe had failed and managed to make other people absorb the consequences. From day one, I was eager, maybe too eager. I came in early, I stayed late, I volunteered for projects outside my lane, I asked questions in meetings. I genuinely cared about the work in a way that, looking back, maybe made some people uncomfortable. Because when you care that visibly, you become a mirror for the people around you who don't. My first year was good. I got a $2,000 raise, positive performance reviews. Marcus would stop by my desk sometimes, call me a real go-getter, and I would feel that approval like a warm light I needed to keep standing there. And that right there was my first problem. I needed his approval. I was building my sense of worth on someone else's scaffolding. By year 2, things started to shift. The company landed a large regional client, a retail chain looking to overhaul their digital presence. It was the biggest contract the firm had signed in years, and everyone knew it. The energy changed. The stakes changed. Marcus was leading the account. He pulled me onto the team. I was the junior person, but I was doing everything. Writing copy, building decks, handling email communication, sitting in on calls and taking notes so detailed they basically wrote the recap emails for everyone. About 4 months into that project, I had an idea. A real one, the kind that woke me up at 2 a.m. because my brain wouldn't let it go. The client's problem wasn't their digital presence. Their problem was their loyalty ecosystem, or the complete lack of one. They were spending enormous money attracting new customers and doing almost nothing to keep the ones they had. I built out a complete strategic framework, a loyalty program concept, backed by data I'd pulled, and with a phased implementation plan and projected ROI. I sent it to Marcus on a Sunday night. He read it because he was always online. He replied, "Interesting, let me think on it." 3 weeks later, he walked into a client meeting and presented a version of my idea as the firm's strategic recommendation. Not a word of credit. I sat in that room, I was there taking notes, the good little junior employee, and I watched him walk through slides that were mine. The framework was mine. The language was mine. The underlying logic was mine. And the client loved it. Gerald loved it. Everyone in that room was looking at Marcus like he was a genius, and I was invisible against the wall, holding my notebook, feeling something I didn't have a name for yet. Now, I want to be careful here, because in the moment, I told myself it was fine. I told myself that's how you pay your dues, that this is how junior employees earn trust, that I should be grateful to even be in the room. I spent the next 6 months telling myself that. And then they eliminated my position. The official reason was budget restructuring. The real reason, the one I've had 5 years to think about, is more complicated and more human, and ultimately more useful to understand. People who feel threatened by you don't give you more responsibility. They removed the threat. I know that now. I couldn't see it then. What I saw then was Marcus across a conference table, telling me that I was adequate but replaceable, that I lacked vision. And the worst part, the part that lived inside me for months afterward, was that some piece of me believed him. Because when someone with authority looks at you calmly and tells you you're not enough, and you've been raised in a world that says authority usually knows, there's a moment where you take that in, you try it on, you turn it over. And I turned it over, sitting in that parking garage for a long, long time. My mom called that night. I didn't tell her right away. I drove home, sat in my apartment, a 1-bedroom in a part of town I'd chosen because the commute was easy, not because I loved it. And I looked at the manila envelope on my kitchen table. 2 weeks, a typed letter, a handshake that felt like a verdict. I was 22 years old. And that's when everything started to change. Not immediately, not dramatically. Change doesn't arrive like a lightning bolt. It arrives like weather, Something in the air shifts, barely perceptible at first, and then suddenly you realize everything is different from what it was. But before the shift, there was the bottom. And I want to sit here with you for a moment in the bottom, because I think we rush past this part too fast in transformation stories. We're so eager to get to the glow up that we skip the part where the person is genuinely on the floor. And if you're watching this from your own floor right now, I don't want you to feel alone in it. The month after I was let go, I applied to 47 jobs. I tracked them on a spreadsheet. Company name, date applied, role, contact person, follow-up sent. 47 rows, 11 first-round interviews, 3 second rounds, 0 offers. I had enough savings for about 3 months of rent. I started buying groceries differently, planning meals around what was on sale, which is a thing you don't notice yourself doing until you're doing it. I stopped going out with friends, partly because I couldn't afford it, mostly because I couldn't afford to explain why. I told people I was taking some time to figure out next steps. That's the professionally acceptable way to say I feel completely lost and I don't know who I am without a job title. Marcus's voice was loud in my head those weeks. Replaceable, lacks vision, adequate. I am not exaggerating when I tell you those 3 words haunted me. But here's the thing about being haunted by someone else's words. Eventually, if you sit with them long enough, you start asking different questions. Not, is he right, but why does this hurt so much? And that question, that small, honest, painful question, was the beginning of everything. Act 2, the decision. I want to be precise about the moment I decided to change, because in stories like this, people often describe it as a single flash of clarity, a cinematic turning point. The reality was both smaller and bigger than that. It was a Tuesday, week 6 of unemployment. I was sitting at my kitchen table at 11 a.m. in sweatpants I'd been wearing since Saturday, eating cereal, watching YouTube videos about, and I'm not proud of this, people who had publicly embarrassed their former bosses on social media. You know the videos. The I quit on my worst day and here's what happened next videos. The my company humiliated me so I did this videos. I spent 2 hours consuming them, and at the end of 2 hours, I felt terrible. Not because the stories were bad, but because I realized what I was actually doing. I was outsourcing my healing to other people's drama. I was using someone else's confrontation as a substitute for my own resolution. I was 22 years old, alone in an apartment, eating cereal at 11 a.m., fantasizing about revenge. And meanwhile, Marcus was at work, completely unbothered, probably not thinking about me at all. That thought landed hard. He was not thinking about me. The person I was giving all of my mental and emotional energy to was not spending a single second of his day on me. I was haunting myself with his voice, and he'd already moved on. That is a deeply uncomfortable thing to realize, and it is also the beginning of freedom. I closed the laptop. I got up, I washed my face, and I changed out of the sweatpants. And I sat back down at the table with a blank notebook, and I wrote one question at the top of the page. If I didn't care what Marcus or anyone at that company thought of me, what would I actually want to build? I stared at that question for probably 20 minutes, and then I started writing. I want to be clear about something here. The decision I made that day was not, I will become successful so that Marcus will regret what he did to me. That version of the story is tempting. It's satisfying. It has a clean villain and a clear scoreboard. But it's also a trap, because if your transformation is fueled by someone else's regret, then your transformation is still for them. You're still building your life around their opinion. You've just inverted the polarity. Instead of needing their approval, you need their suffering. And you don't realize that either way, they are still the center of your universe. What I wrote in that notebook that Tuesday was different. It was messier. It was more honest. I wrote about the idea I developed, the one Marcus had presented as his own. I wrote about how alive I'd felt building that framework at 2 a.m., not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I was genuinely excited about the problem. I wrote about how I'd always been drawn to the intersection of business strategy and consumer behavior, how I'd read every case study I could find on loyalty ecosystems and customer lifetime value, not because my job required it, but because it genuinely fascinated me. I wrote, "That idea was mine. If Marcus could build a career presenting it, imagine what I could do developing it for myself." And that was the moment. Not a lightning bolt, a sentence in a notebook. I made 3 decisions that day. First, I would spend the next 60 days not applying to traditional jobs. I would spend those 60 days learning, ruthlessly, completely without apology. Second, I would not talk about what I was doing, not to friends who would tell me I was being unrealistic, not to family who would worry, not online where anyone could see the gap between where I was and where I was going. The work would happen in private. The results would be the announcement. Third, I would not waste another calorie of my energy on Marcus or what he'd done. He was a chapter. I was turning the page. Now, I need to tell you what the next year actually looked like, because this is the part of transformation stories that gets glossed over, the part that isn't cinematic, isn't shareable, isn't particularly inspiring when you're living it, the part where you just do the work. I had 3 months of savings. I stretched them by doing freelance work, mostly basic content writing and social media management, things I could pick up on Upwork and Fiverr while I was building something else. It was humbling. I had a business degree and 2 years of agency experience, and I was writing product descriptions for a candle company for $0.04 a word. But here's what that humbling did. It turned off my ego. When your ego is off, you can learn at a speed that used to be impossible. You're not busy protecting what you already know. You're not worried about looking like a beginner. You're just absorbing. I picked 3 areas of focus and I went deep. First, customer experience strategy, the domain where I'd had my original idea, the one Marcus had taken. I read every book I could find. Academic texts, industry reports, case studies from Harvard Business School. I found online communities where practitioners actually talked to each other. I started participating, asking questions, offering observations, eventually sharing frameworks I was developing. Second, data analytics. This was my weakness, and I knew it. The idea I'd built for that client would have been even stronger if I'd been able to back it with more rigorous quantitative analysis. So I enrolled in a free online data analytics course, then a paid one, then another. I was not naturally gifted at this. I failed the first practice assessment for the paid course twice. I did not interpret that as a sign I should stop. I interpreted it as information about where I needed to spend more time. Third, the business of consulting itself. Not just doing the work, but understanding how to package it, price it, sell it. I read every business book I could find. Not the pop psych ones, though I read some of those too, but the structural ones. How companies get built, how expertise becomes a product, how you take what's in your head and turn it into something a client will pay for. Monday through Friday, I woke up at 6 a.m. I exercised, not because I was on a fitness journey, though my body did eventually change, but because I quickly learned that my brain worked better when I moved my body first thing. By 7:30, I was at my table with coffee and I worked until noon. Freelance work in the afternoons to pay rent. Reading and coursework from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Saturday mornings, I reviewed the week, what I'd learned, what I needed to revisit, what the next week should focus on. Sunday, I rested, genuinely rested. I learned quickly that grinding 7 days a week produces diminishing returns and eventually breaks you. This was my life for 8 months, and I want to be honest with you. There were stretches of those 8 months that were deeply lonely. I watched my friends get promotions, get engaged, buy apartments, post about work trips and team happy hours, and I was sitting in my 1-bedroom, doing homework at 22 years old, trusting a process that I had no external evidence was going to work. Some nights I opened that notebook and read the question I'd written on that Tuesday. If I didn't care what Marcus or anyone at that company thought of me, what would I actually want to build? And I would write more. I would refine the vision. I would add to the framework I was developing for what I eventually came to call customer retention architecture, a structured approach to how businesses keep the people they work so hard to attract. The vision got clearer over those 8 months, which is strange because externally, nothing looked like it was working, but internally, the fog was lifting. And when the fog lifts, even slowly, even partially, you start to move differently. There's something I want to say about the hurt, about Marcus and the meeting and the parking garage, because I think when people tell transformation stories, they sometimes imply that the way to move forward is to simply not feel the thing, to be tough, to weaponize your pain and redirect it. That's not what I did, and I don't think that's what works. What I did about 3 months into this period was go to therapy. 1 session a week with a woman named Dr. Alicia Reeves, who was nothing like what I expected a therapist to be. Direct, occasionally funny, zero tolerance for the stories I was telling myself that weren't serving me. In our sessions, I processed what had actually happened at that company. Not just the firing, but what I'd allowed to happen before it. The way I'd made Marcus's approval the barometer of my worth. The way I'd handed over my idea without protecting it because I didn't yet believe enough in myself to say, this is mine. The way I'd confused loyalty with self-erasure. That work, the quiet, unglamorous therapy work, was as important as the skills development. Maybe more, because you can learn everything there is to know about customer retention architecture and still be stuck if the story you tell yourself about your own value hasn't changed. I needed both, the knowledge and the healing. They were happening simultaneously, feeding each other. By month 9, I had a certificate in data analytics, a completed methodology for what I was calling a customer retention audit, and 3 small clients I'd found through the online communities I'd been participating in. 2 startups and the regional restaurant chain that had approached me after I commented on a post about their loyalty program struggles. The revenue from those first 3 clients in month 9, $4,200. Not life-changing money, but proof. And that's when everything started to change. Act 3, the transformation. Act 3, the transformation. Here's what nobody tells you about transformation. It's invisible for a long time. You're doing the work, you're building the thing, you're becoming a different version of yourself, and the world has absolutely no idea. That's actually an advantage. There's a quality to the early stages of genuine growth that feels almost like being underground, roots spreading, foundation deepening, and nothing to show on the surface, but roots that go. Deep roots don't come up in storms, and when you finally break ground, you're not a seedling, you're already something. By year 2, I was 24 now, the business had a name. I called it Retain. Simple, direct, exactly what it did. I had 6 clients on retainer and a methodology that I had now refined through real-world application. The restaurant chain had seen a 23% improvement in repeat customer visits in the 6 months after implementing my recommendations. One of the startups had cut their customer churn rate by nearly 1/3. Numbers, real numbers, not projections, results. I hired my first contractor, a data analyst named Priya, who I found through the same online communities where I had been learning. She was brilliant, freelancing while figuring out her own next move, and we clicked immediately. She made my work better in ways I hadn't anticipated. I moved to a different apartment, not a fancy one, just one I'd chosen because I loved the neighborhood, not because the commute was convenient to a job I no longer had. Let me tell you about the invisible transformation first, because I think it's the most important one. By 24, I had become someone who knew, in their bones, what they were worth. Not arrogantly, not loudly, but with a quiet, settled certainty that I had not possessed at 22. When I sat across from a potential client, I was not hoping they liked me. I was not monitoring their facial expressions for signs of approval. I was evaluating them, deciding whether this was a relationship I wanted to enter, whether their problem was one my firm was positioned to solve, whether the engagement would be good for both of us. That shift from seeking approval to evaluating fit is something I cannot overstate the significance of. It changes everything. The way you speak, the way you price your services, the way you handle objections. When you know what you're worth, you don't discount, you don't apologize, you don't shrink yourself to fit someone else's comfort. I think about Marcus a lot less by this point, not because I forced myself not to, but because there are so many more interesting things to think about. The external transformation was also happening. I was working out consistently now, not obsessively, but regularly. My posture had changed. The way I dressed had changed. Not flashy, but intentional. I looked like someone who was going somewhere. One of my clients, the founder of a Nashville-based e-commerce startup, said something to me in a meeting that I still think about. She said, "You're different from every other consultant I've worked with. You don't act like you need this." She didn't mean I was indifferent. She meant I was unentangled. I could tell her hard truths because I wasn't afraid of losing her approval. I could be confident in my recommendations because I wasn't performing confidence. I had it. That's what 18 months of hard, honest, invisible work had produced. The first public sign that something had shifted came in month 19. I wrote a long post on LinkedIn, my first piece of public writing in almost 2 years, about customer retention strategy. It wasn't promotional. It wasn't a case study. It was just a genuine, well-articulated piece of thinking about a problem I'd become expert in. It got shared 2,300 times in 4 days. I got 47 connection requests from decision makers at companies I had previously considered completely out of reach. 3 of them turned into client inquiries. 2 of those became engagements. I'm not going to pretend I didn't feel a version of satisfaction about that post, about the fact that I'd built this quietly, privately, without a platform or a big following or anyone vouching for me, and suddenly people were paying attention. But the satisfaction wasn't about anyone from my past seeing it. The satisfaction was simply mine. It was the feeling of something you've built working the way you hoped it would. That's a different kind of feeling than revenge. It's cleaner, it's fuller, it's yours. Year 3 brought the first real challenges to what I'd built, and I want to tell you about them because transformation stories that skip the ongoing struggle are doing you a disservice. I lost a client, a significant one, because their new CFO came in and made sweeping cuts to non-essential vendor contracts. Our retainer was non-essential. The fact that our work had generated measurable value for them was apparently beside the point. It stung. I won't pretend it didn't. For about 48 hours, some of the old voices came back, the ones that sounded like Marcus. Maybe you're not as good as you think. Maybe this was luck. Maybe you're... And then I did what I'd learned to do. I gave the voices 48 hours, and then I got back to work. I replaced that client within 5 weeks, at a higher retainer. I also had my first genuine business failure that year, a methodology I'd been developing for a new type of engagement that simply didn't work. It was too complex, didn't deliver results as clearly as my core offering, and I'd spent 4 months on it. I shut it down. I didn't wallow. I extracted everything that was useful from the work, incorporated it into the existing methodology where it fit, and let the rest go. That's something I'd learned. The relationship between failure and growth is not one-to-one. Not every failure grows you equally. Some of them are just information. Take the information, thank the failure, and move. By 25, 3 years after that parking garage, Retain had 6 full-time employees, 14 ongoing client relationships, and annual revenue just under $700,000. I will never forget the day I looked at that number in my accounting software. I sat there for a while. Not in disbelief, I had worked toward it deliberately enough that I'd seen it coming, but in a kind of quiet, grateful recognition. At 22, I had been handed a manila envelope and told I was replaceable. At 25, I was running something irreplaceable. And that's when everything started to change. The people from my old world started noticing, not because I told them. I had been scrupulously quiet about everything I was building, not out of secrecy, but because I'd internalized something important. Your energy goes where your attention goes. I had chosen to give my attention to the build, not the audience. But LinkedIn is a small world. Nashville is a small world, and word moves. A former colleague from the firm, someone I genuinely liked, a woman named Jade, reached out to congratulate me. Her message was warm and specific and clearly meant. We got coffee. She told me that people at the firm still talked about the loyalty program idea that Marcus had presented that day, that at some point in the past year or so, people had quietly connected the dots, had understood whose idea it actually was. I asked her how Marcus was doing. She paused, said he'd been passed over for partner twice, that the firm had gone through some restructuring and his client list had shrunk, that he seemed, in her word, diminished. I want to be honest about how I felt hearing that. There was a moment, a half second maybe, where something like satisfaction flickered. I'm human. It flickered. And then it passed, because by 25, I understood something I hadn't at 22. The universe doesn't keep score the way we think it does. People's lives don't unfold as punishments and rewards calibrated to the harm they've done. Marcus's struggles were Marcus's. They had nothing to do with me. What I had built was not a monument to his failure. It was a monument to my choice, to that Tuesday in the sweatpants and the notebook and the question. If I didn't care what Marcus or anyone at that company thought of me, what would I actually want to build? I had built it. That was the whole story. Whatever Marcus was experiencing was a footnote. Act 4, The Encounter, 45 minutes to 58 minutes. I told you at the beginning about the Thursday in Nashville, the rooftop restaurant, the voicemail. I want to tell you the full version now. It was the spring of my 27th year. Retain had just closed its best quarter, $280,000 in revenue across a single 3-month period. We had 16 employees. We had just been featured in a regional business publication, one of those companies to watch stories that I had been too busy to pay much attention to, but that my team was very pleased about. The deal I was closing that Thursday was a regional hospitality group, hotels, restaurants, the full stack, that wanted to completely overhaul their customer retention. Infrastructure. It was a complex, multi-phase engagement, exactly the kind of work I'd been building toward. My contact at the hospitality group had asked me to come to this restaurant, one of theirs, both for the meeting and, I suspected, as a quiet demonstration of what they were working with. The food was exceptional. The service was choreographed. The environment was beautiful. We were deep into the conversation, the deal basically done, when my phone buzzed the first time. Unknown-ish number, except I'd saved it years ago and never deleted it. The name on my screen, Marcus Bellamy. I put the phone face down, continued the meeting. It buzzed again 10 minutes later. I excused myself to the restroom, listened to the voicemail. His voice sounded different than I remembered. Still polished, still controlled, but with an edge underneath that hadn't been there before. Something slightly tighter. He said, "Hey, it's Marcus Bellamy from your time at Henderson Group. I've been following what you've built over at Retain. Really impressive stuff. Look, I'll be straight with you. We're actually in the market for some outside strategy work, and your name keeps coming up. Would love to grab coffee and reconnect. No pressure, just want to see where your head's at." I listened to it twice. No pressure, just want to see where your head's at. I thought about 22-year-old me in the parking garage. I thought about 47 job applications and $0.04 per word content work, and a Tuesday in sweatpants. I thought about the notebook and the question. I thought about Priya and the team and 16 employees and $280,000 in a single quarter. I thought about what I wanted, and I realized I didn't want anything from Marcus. Not coffee, not the satisfaction of a confrontation, not even the quiet pleasure of watching his face register who I'd become. I had imagined some version of that moment so many times in year 1, year 2, the symbolic encounter, the visible reckoning. But sitting in a bathroom in a beautiful restaurant on the day of a major deal, I felt nothing. Not anger, not triumph, not nostalgia. Just nothing, in the most peaceful sense of that word. I went back to the table, finished the meeting, we shook hands. I did not call Marcus back that day. I did not craft a careful response that balanced warmth with just the right amount of cool detachment. I didn't post anything on LinkedIn. I didn't tell the story to anyone for catharsis. I drove home, made dinner, went to bed at a reasonable hour because I had a 7 a.m. call with a client on the East Coast. 2 days later, I replied to his voicemail with a text message. Professional, courteous, brief. Hey Marcus, thanks for reaching out. Currently at capacity for new engagements, but I'll keep you in mind if that changes. Good luck with everything. 13 words, the right ones. Not because I wanted him to feel bad, not to signal anything, because it was true. We were at capacity. And because it was the response I'd have given anyone I wasn't in a position to take on as a client. The moment it became about showing him something was the moment I'd have made him the center of my universe again. I'd spent too long building my own center to give that up for a symbolic gesture. He texted back within an hour. Totally understand. Really impressed with what you've built. Would love to stay in touch. I didn't respond to that one. I want to tell you about a different encounter though, one that actually mattered to me. About 2 months after the Nashville deal closed, my mother came to visit. She'd been to my office before, but this was the first time she stayed for a full week, saw the daily texture of what I'd built, the team, the clients, the rhythm. On her last night, we were sitting at my kitchen table, the same kind of kitchen table where I'd eaten cereal at 11 a.m. in sweatpants, except a different apartment, a different table, a different life. And she said to me, I knew you would figure it out. I just didn't know it would look like this. I asked her what she thought it would look like. She thought about it. She said, I thought you'd find a good company, work your way up, eventually be comfortable. She paused. This is different from comfortable. I've thought about that distinction a lot since then. Comfortable versus this, whatever this is. This is not comfortable, exactly. Running something, leading people, solving problems nobody has solved before, it's not comfortable. Some days it's actively difficult in ways that comfortable could never prepare you for. But it's mine. Every corner of it was built with a choice I made for myself. Not for Marcus, not against Marcus, not to prove anything to anyone in any parking garage anywhere. It's mine in a way that 22-year-old me, scrambling for someone else's approval, desperate for the warm light of Marcus's attention, that version of me couldn't have understood, didn't know how to want it yet. I think about that kid sometimes, the one in the parking garage. I don't look back at him with embarrassment, the way we often look back at our past selves. I look back at him with something closer to tenderness. He was doing the best he could with what he had. He hadn't been taught yet that his worth was something he generated, not something that was assigned to him. He hadn't yet learned to build his sense of self from the inside out. He was waiting for the world to tell him who he was. That's not a flaw, that's a starting point. The 5 years between that parking garage and the Nashville restaurant were the years I learned to stop waiting. Let me tell you about the last encounter in this story. Not with Marcus, with myself. Last year, I was 26, I hired a leadership coach, a woman named Diane who had spent 30 years in executive development and had precisely zero patience for excuses of any kind. In one of our sessions, she asked me, what would you do differently if you weren't afraid? And I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not in the ways I used to be. Not afraid of being told I'm replaceable because I know now that the people who said that were protecting themselves from the threat of what I could become. Not afraid of failure because I failed and survived it and extracted value from it. Not afraid of what people think of what I'm building because what I'm building speaks for itself. I told Diane I'd go bigger. She said, then go bigger. We are going bigger. We closed our first national client 6 months ago, a consumer brand with retail presence in 42 states, running a retention campaign across all of them. It's the most complex engagement we've ever taken on. It is terrifying and wonderful in exactly the right proportions. When I tell that client's team what the strategy is, they listen. Not because I've performed confidence, because I've earned it in notebooks and free online courses and therapy sessions and $0.04 per word content work and 47 job applications and a Tuesday in sweatpants. And that is something that cannot be taken, assigned, or replaced. That's when everything stopped changing because it had already become what it was always supposed to be. Outro.
I want to leave you with the thing I actually believe, not the tidy version, the true one. The best revenge is living well. You've heard that before, probably on a bumper sticker or motivational poster in someone else's bathroom. And you've probably noticed that it sounds right, but lands hollow, because revenge is still the organizing word. Living well is still in service of proving something to someone who wronged you. Let me give you the version I actually live by. Living well is its own reward. Full stop, period, end of sentence. The glow up is not for them. It is not even for the audience watching you. The glow up is the discovery of who you actually are when you remove the noise, the approval seeking, the fear of judgment, the constant calibration of yourself against someone else's expectations, and just build. What do you build? That's the question only you can answer. And if you don't know yet, that's not a failure. That's where the journey starts, with a blank notebook page and an honest question. Here's the practical advice, the things I wish someone had handed me in that parking garage. 1. Give your pain a finite window. Feel it completely. Don't rush past it or suppress it, but give it a deadline. Mine was 48 hours, and then back to work. Wallowing is seductive because it feels like processing, but at a certain point, it's just residence. Don't move in. 2. Build in private for as long as you can stand it. The urge to announce your transformation before it's complete is completely understandable and almost always counterproductive. Silence protects the work. Let the result be the announcement. 3. Get the therapy, the coaching, or whatever structure for honest self-reflection works for you. Skills without self-knowledge are a car with a cracked engine. You'll go somewhere, but not as far, and eventually something breaks. 4. Find the thing you do even if nobody was watching. The idea that woke you up at 2 a.m. The problem you'd think about for free. Because when your work is actually yours, when it comes from something real inside you, it has a quality that work for approval never achieves. People can feel the difference. 5. Let the Marcus in your story be a chapter, not the villain of the whole book, not the engine of your transformation. A chapter. And then write more chapters, better ones that have nothing to do with him at all. You are not replaceable. I don't mean that in the inspirational poster sense. I mean it as a specific factual claim. There is no one who has your exact combination of experience, perspective, obsession, pain, and vision. That combination, however rough it is right now, however unproven, however early in its development, is uniquely yours. It cannot be replicated. It cannot be presented in a meeting by someone else and owned by them. You have to be the one to build with it. So, build. Quietly, diligently, for yourself. And when the Marcus of your story finally calls, if they ever do, let it go to voicemail. I want to hear from you. What's your glow-up story? Where are you right now? In the parking garage, in the sweatpants, in the 8 months of invisible work, or somewhere on the other side? Tell me below. I read every comment. And if your story deserves its own video, I'll make it. If this hits something real for you, share it with someone who needs it. And if you're new here, welcome. Subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from. I'll see you next week. Take care of yourselves.